30 Scaffolding hazards and precautions. Collapsing or falling from the scaffold due to improper assembly or inadequate anchoring. Slips, trips, and falls due to slippery or uneven scaffold surfaces. Electrocution from contact with power lines or electrical equipment. Falling objects from the scaffold or above the scaffold. Struck by vehicles or equipment passing under or near the scaffold. Overloading the scaffold beyond its capacity. Lack of proper guardrails or barriers. Inadequate communication between workers on the scaffold and those working below. Inadequate training of workers using the scaffold. Weather conditions, such as high winds, rain, or snow, that can affect the stability of the scaffold. Collisions with the scaffold by moving equipment, vehicles, or personnel. Structural defects or damage to the scaffold components. Incorrect positioning of the scaffold, leading to instability or tipping. Inadequate maintenance and inspection of the scaffold. Improper use of tools or equipment on the scaffold, leading to accidents or damage. Inadequate lighting, ventilation, or access to the scaffold. Exposure to hazardous substances, such as chemicals or fumes, on or near the scaffold. Inadequate personal protective equipment, such as hard hats or safety harnesses. Fire hazards due to the use of welding or cutting equipment on the scaffold. Inadequate emergency procedures in case of accidents or incidents on the scaffold. Inadequate access to first aid or medical facilities in case of injury on the scaffold. Lack of proper training and supervision for workers performing scaffolding work. Incorrect use of scaffolding components or tools. Insufficient inspection of the scaffold before use. Improper handling and storage of scaffold components when not in use. Inadequate clearance from power lines or other overhead hazards. Lack of communication between workers on different levels of the scaffold. Inadequate protection from inclement weather conditions. Inadequate signage or warning systems to alert workers and others to the presence of scaffolding. Use of non-compliant or non-certified scaffolding components. Scaffolding safety precautions. Ensure that the scaffold is erected by a competent person and inspected before use. Use proper scaffolding components and follow the manufacturer's instructions for assembly and use. Ensure that the scaffold is properly anchored and secured to prevent collapse or tipping. Use guardrails or barriers to prevent falls from the scaffold. Provide workers with proper personal protective equipment, including hard hats, safety harnesses, and non-slip footwear. Train workers on the proper use and maintenance of the scaffold and any equipment used on the scaffold. Conduct regular inspections and maintenance of the scaffold to ensure its safety and integrity. Properly position the scaffold to ensure stability and access to work areas. Ensure adequate clearance from power lines and other overhead hazards. Use warning signs or barriers to alert others to the presence of the scaffold and potential hazards. Implement emergency procedures and ensure access to first aid or medical facilities in case of accidents or incidents on the scaffold. Follow all applicable safety regulations and standards for scaffolding use. Ensure adequate communication between workers on the scaffold and those working below. Use appropriate lighting, ventilation, and access to the scaffold. Secure tools and equipment to prevent falling objects. Provide regular safety training and supervision for workers performing